Today I will tell you a story I never thought I would share. I bought a villa in secret, hoping it would be a gift to my family, a place for joy and togetherness. Yet one day, I saw my daughter-in-law pointing with authority, declaring that the master suite belonged to her and my son. She said I could manage in the corner room. I stayed hidden. I changed every lock, and the next day the cameras revealed a truth more painful than I ever imagined. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to hear more grandma life stories. Stories about love, betrayal, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to stand tall when family becomes your greatest test. My name is Nora Caldwell. I am 68 years old, and this is my life. I was married to Daniel for 40 years. He was my partner in every sense, my anchor and my laughter, the man who knew how I took my tea and when I needed silence more than words. He left me one bitter winter morning, his heart giving out with no warning. They said it was quick, that he didn't suffer, but I did. Every breath since has felt heavier. The house we shared, a modest wooden place on the edge of Portland, became unbearably hollow after his passing. It echoed with silence. The rooms that once carried our conversations now carried only the sound of creaking floorboards. Every morning I clung to rituals, the little things that tethered me to life. I boiled water in the dented kettle, poured it carefully into my mother's blue porcelain teapot, and let the chamomile steep. The scent of flowers rose with the steam, soft and soothing. I carried the cup into the garden, where roses I had tended for decades waited for my hands. Their thorns pricked my gloves, their blooms bent under dew, and I found comfort in pruning them, in knowing that living things still depended on me. When the chores were done, I sat at the kitchen table with my old fountain pen. I opened my leather-bound journal and wrote a few lines. Nothing profound, just fragments of thoughts, sometimes even single words. A way to prove to myself I was still here, but no matter how hard I tried to fill the hours, the emptiness remained. A house without Daniel was no longer a home. It was a shelter of wood and nails, a place where air lingered but warmth had fled. One morning, with mist still clinging to the trees outside, I whispered to myself, "A house is just bricks and timber, until the person you share it with is gone. Then it becomes a museum of what once was." That thought lingered. I realized that if I stayed in that house, I would slowly vanish within it, swallowed by memories and silence. I needed something new, not to erase my past, but to remind myself that the future could still hold a place for me. It was then that I began to consider what seemed unthinkable. I began to dream of buying another home, not to replace Daniel, but to create something that could carry forward the love we once built. I thought of Lake Oswego, where Daniel and I had once strolled on summer evenings, the water reflecting gold. There was a villa there I had noticed. Red roof tiles, a wide porch, gardens that stretched open like arms waiting to embrace. I drove past it more than once, slowing the car as though afraid my longing would betray me. That longing soon became a decision. With the life insurance money, I would buy it. Quietly, carefully, without telling Ethan or Lydia. Not yet. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to walk them through its doors one day and say, "This is for us, for the grandchildren, for new beginnings." But secrets have weight. They press on your chest at night. And I would soon learn that what I thought was a gift could be twisted into something else. For now, though, all I had was the silence of my old home and the vision of a villa by the lake. The contrast between them felt like the contrast between grief and hope, between death and life. I held that vision tightly, not knowing it would lead me into a confrontation I never wished for, not knowing that those I loved most would see my dream not as an act of love, but as an opportunity to claim for themselves. It was not just for a house, but for my dignity, my independence, and the truth that no one, not even family, has the right to decide your worth. When the life insurance money from Daniel's passing arrived, I held the check in my hands and stared at it for what felt like hours. It was not a fortune by the standards of the world, but to me, it carried the weight of 40 years of love and loss. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers. It was as though Daniel's absence had been converted into numbers, and that thought alone nearly crushed me. Money could never replace him, yet I knew I could not let it sit idly as a reminder of grief. It needed to become something living, something with purpose. One Saturday, when the fog lifted from Portland's streets, I drove to Lake Oswego. Daniel and I had once strolled there in summer, his hand warm in mine, our laughter echoing across the water. I had avoided that place since his death, but on that morning, something compelled me to return. The road curved along the lake, lined with trees whose leaves shivered in the wind, and then, almost as if fate wanted me to stop, I saw it. A villa with red roof tiles, a wide porch that seemed to welcome, and a garden stretching forward like an open palm. A black iron fence encircled it, sturdy yet elegant. On it hung a weathered sign, "For sale." I pulled over, killed the engine, and sat quietly. My heart thudded harder than it had in months. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and walked slowly toward the gate. My fingers brushed the cold iron. I reached out and let my hand rest on the sign. The wood was splintered, the letters fading, but to me, it felt like a beacon. For a moment, I imagined Daniel standing beside me. I heard his voice as clearly as if he were there. "You've always wanted a garden big enough for roses and hydrangeas. Look, Nora, this is the place." My throat tightened. Inside my chest, grief clashed with hope. Could I really begin again here? Could I fill these empty rooms with laughter once more? I walked the perimeter, noting the cracked stone path, the climbing ivy curling along the porch posts, the faint smell of pine from the nearby woods. I closed my eyes and pictured family gatherings, Ethan arriving with Lydia, children's voices tumbling up the stairs, holiday dinners with plates spread wide on a long oak table. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I allowed myself to envision joy. But reality intruded quickly. I knew my son. I knew his wife. Their voices still rang in my ears from recent calls. "Mother, you shouldn't be alone in that old place. It's too big, too drafty. You'd be better off somewhere else." The way Lydia's tone softened at the end, sugar-coated yet sharp, unsettled me. Their interest in my comfort was always tied to my finances. I tightened my grip on the fence. A decision began to form, not from impulse, but from instinct born of years of experience. I would buy this villa, not for them, not even entirely for myself, but for the possibility of a future that belonged to me, built with my own will. At the attorney's office, I listened carefully as he explained how to establish a trust. His voice was steady, professional. "It will protect your privacy, Mrs. Caldwell. The purchase will not appear in your name until you decide to reveal it. Only the trustee will be aware." I nodded, signing each page with deliberate care. With every stroke of the pen, I felt both vulnerable and powerful. Then I contacted a management company, asking them to oversee renovations. I walked through the villa with the project manager, pointing to the worn hardwood floors. "Refinish these," I said. I touched the chipped kitchen counter. "Replace it with marble, strong, clean, enduring." I surprised myself with the clarity of my instructions. It was as though Daniel's voice whispered through me, urging me to build something solid. That night, as I sat by the lamplight with my teapot and journal, I wrote a single sentence. I bought a villa in secret. I stared at the words. They carried both guilt and exhilaration. I imagined Ethan's face when I finally revealed it, his eyes widening, Lydia perhaps shedding a tear, though whether of gratitude or calculation, I could not be sure. And yet, deep down, I knew this secret was necessary. It was not just about creating a surprise. It was about protecting the purity of my intention. Sometimes, when family has learned to use affection as a weapon, the only way to safeguard joy is to keep it hidden until the right moment. I closed the journal and looked around my small, silent house. The walls seemed to lean inward as though pressing me out. For the first time, I did not feel bound by them. I felt the pull of the villa by the lake, waiting with its open garden and red roof. The decision filled me with a quiet fire. A woman my age is often told to play safe, to downsize, to stay where she can be managed. But I had chosen differently. I had chosen to claim a piece of life while I still had breath to live it. When I went to bed, I placed the signed documents beneath my pillow. My last thought before sleep was not of loneliness, but of anticipation. I had stepped into something unknown, and though fear lingered, it was laced with resolve. The phone rang just as the evening shadows stretched long across my wooden floors. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my tea gone cold, when Ethan's name flashed on the screen. My son. My only child. I picked up, pressing the phone gently to my ear. "Mom," he said, his voice warm at first, carefully measured. "Are you doing all right? I've been thinking about you. That old house. It creaks in winter. The drafts get worse every year. The season ahead will be harsh. You shouldn't be there alone." I closed my eyes. His words could have been a son's genuine concern, but I had learned to hear the notes beneath the melody. It was the pause before he said harsh, the careful way he said alone, a concern laced with suggestion. Before I could answer, I heard her voice slide into the call. "Lydia, we only want you to be happy," she said sweetly. "You deserve somewhere brighter, with more light and space, somewhere that lifts your spirits. A new home could do that for you." Her words lingered, polished like glass. They sounded like love, but the sharpness underneath cut at me. I sat in silence for a breath too long. "Nora?" Ethan prompted. I forced a small laugh. "You two seem to be thinking a lot about my living situation." Lydia chimed in, eager. "Because we care. We don't want you rattling around that old place. You need somewhere safe, fresh, somewhere you can look forward to waking up every day." My fingers traced the rim of my teacup. Once, when Ethan was 8 years old, he had come home from school with a scraped knee. He'd sat at this very table, clutching my hand, promising through tears, "I'll always take care of you, Mom. Always." The memory pierced me now. His small hand had been so firm, so sure. Yet the man on the other end of the line echoed none of that innocence. I answered softly, careful to steady my voice. "I manage fine here. This house has seen me through worse winters." Ethan exhaled, disappointment seeping through. "But why settle, Mom? Why not let yourself live better? You have the means. We can even help you look for something. There are places on the market right now that would be perfect." I let the silence hold for a moment. My eyes drifted to the journal beside me, the page from last night's entry still open. I imagined telling them about the villa, about the garden and the porch, about the future I had already chosen. For one brief instant, I wanted to hear the surprise in Ethan's voice, maybe even joy. But then I pictured Lydia's eyes, the way they brightened when money was mentioned, like sparks catching dry wood. If I told them, the villa would no longer be a gift. It would become a calculation. Not gratitude, but strategy. "I appreciate your concern," I finally said. "Truly. But I'm not ready to leave this house just yet." There was a beat of silence. Then Lydia's tone shifted, still gentle, but tighter. "We only want to help. Think about how much easier it would be for us to visit if you were somewhere bigger. We could bring the kids, stay longer. It could feel like a real family home." Her words pressed against me, testing the edges of my resolve. She spoke of family, but I heard ownership, a place for them to spread out, a place for their needs. Ethan added quickly, "She's right, Mom. We've been talking, and it just makes sense. You don't have to do this alone." I smiled, though they could not see it. My smile was thin, tempered by the knowledge that love had become a language of persuasion in their mouths. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing my vagueness would frustrate them. After we hung up, the quiet returned, thick as fog. I sat unmoving, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a dog outside. My heart ached, but not from loneliness this time. It was from clarity. I picked up my pen and wrote in the journal. If I tell them, they will look at the villa with eyes of ownership, not with eyes of gratitude. As the ink dried, I whispered aloud, testing the truth of my own words. The sound startled me, but it also steadied me. The phone buzzed again minutes later. A message this time. Lydia had sent a link to a real estate listing. A wide suburban house, polished granite counters, double garage. Her note read, "See, something like this could be perfect for you and us." I stared at the screen. The "and us" told me everything. I deleted the message without replying. Then I brewed a fresh pot of chamomile tea, letting the steam rise into the cold air of the kitchen. I watched it curl and fade. In that fleeting swirl of vapor, I saw the truth more clearly than ever. I would hold my secret close. The villa by the lake was mine. For now, it would remain hidden. My gift, my refuge, my choice. I whispered into the empty room, "Not yet. They will not know, not until I decide." And with that vow, the walls around me seemed less hollow. I had drawn a line, invisible but unbreakable. The rain that afternoon fell in fine silver threads, coating the windshield of my car as I drove toward the villa. I carried with me 3 clay pots of roses, freshly cut from my old garden, my hands still smelling faintly of damp soil. I had intended to place them by the porch, small living tokens to mark the beginning of something new. When I turned the corner and the villa came into view, its red roof gleaming wet against the gray sky, I felt a surge of quiet pride. This was mine, my secret, my sanctuary. I parked near the gate, shielding the flowers with my coat as I walked through the drizzle. But before I reached the porch, voices slipped through the rain. A woman's voice, firm, possessive. "Lydia." My body stilled. The rain dripping from the roses in my arms seemed suddenly louder. "This master suite belongs to me and Ethan," she said, with a certainty that froze my blood. "She'll manage fine in the corner room." For a moment I could not move. My breath caught in my chest. I pressed myself against the doorframe, heart pounding so loudly I feared they would hear. The roses trembled in my grasp. Inside, Ethan's voice rose, hesitant, the way he used to sound when he was caught between truth and convenience. "Lydia, maybe Mom will feel hurt if we—" But she cut him off sharply, the rain outside punctuating her words. "She'll adjust. This place is perfect for us. The view, the space, everything. You know as well as I do that she doesn't need the best room." Their footsteps moved across the hardwood floor. I dared to peek through the narrow gap of the doorway. Lydia stood with her hand gesturing toward the staircase, her eyes lit with hunger, not joy. Ethan lingered behind her, shoulders tense, gaze lowered. I felt something inside me fracture. I had imagined this villa as a gift, a place to bring us closer, a surprise that might heal what had grown distant. Instead, I was overhearing my own demotion, as though I were an afterthought in the home I had bought with my husband's last provision. I backed away slowly, careful not to let the roses slip from my arms. My shoes sank into the wet earth, my heart hammering against my ribs. Each word I had heard carved itself into me, sharp as a blade. Corner room. She'll manage. By the time I reached my car, I could barely hold the steering wheel steady. I placed the roses on the passenger seat, their petals bruised by the rain. For hours, I sat there. The villa loomed in the distance, glowing faintly through the storm, but I could not bring myself to look directly at it. Memories flooded in unbidden. Ethan as a boy, his small hand tucked into mine, whispering after a nightmare, "I'll always take care of you, Mom." I remembered his first apartment, his nervous pride as he showed me the wobbly bookshelf he had built. The man in that house today was not the boy who once looked at me with unfiltered devotion. He had grown into someone who let silence become consent. I pulled out my journal, my faithful witness, and opened it across the steering wheel. My pen hovered above the page, but the words refused to come. The rain streaked down the windshield, blurring the world outside. I waited, staring at the blank paper, until the ink at the tip began to dry. Hours passed that way, me motionless, trapped between disbelief and grief. Only when night settled in, Long after the rain had ceased, did I find the strength to write. My hand trembled, but I forced the words onto the page. It is not loneliness that kills us. It is when those we love most begin to see us as a burden. I read the sentence over and over, the ink glistening wet under the car's dome light. It felt like a confession, but also a warning. Somewhere deep inside, a new awareness stirred. Their words had exposed what they truly thought of me. And once heard, truth cannot be unheard. I closed the journal, my fingers pressing against its leather cover as though to seal the pain inside. I leaned back against the seat, the smell of wet roses filling the air. A storm had broken inside me, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. When I finally drove away, the villa disappeared in the rearview mirror, dark and silent. But Lydia's voice remained lodged in my ears, her claim echoing with every turn of the wheels. This master suite belongs to me and Ethan. She'll manage fine in the corner room. The words were not simply careless. They were a blueprint, a glimpse of what my future would look like if I allowed it. And in that realization, amid my heartbreak, a spark of resolve began to glow. The night I overheard Lydia's voice still clung to me like damp air. I had sat for hours in my car, her words replaying until they became sharper than the rain on the windshield. This master suite belongs to me and Ethan. She'll manage fine in the corner room. Each syllable had been branded into my mind. By the time I drove home, I felt hollowed out and filled with fire all at once. I entered my small house, dropped my soaked coat onto the chair, and stood for a long moment in the dark. I could smell the faint trace of roses clinging to my hands. The pots I had carried to the villa still sat abandoned in the back seat of my car, their petals bruised. My chest ached. I had wanted to plant them as symbols of hope. Instead, they had become witnesses to betrayal. But grief, I have learned, can be sharpened into resolve. I picked up the phone with fingers that no longer trembled. "Emergency locksmith," a man's voice answered, groggy. "I need every lock changed," I said firmly. "Tonight." There was a pause, as though he hadn't heard correctly. "Ma'am, it's nearly midnight." "I don't care," I replied. My voice surprised even me, calm, steel-wrapped in velvet. "I'll pay what you ask. Just bring what you need." An hour later, headlights swept across the villa's driveway. His van rattled as he pulled up, tools clinking. I met him under the porch light, the rain tapering to a mist. He studied me, perhaps curious about the urgency, but he asked no questions. Some men understand silence better than explanation. "Which locks?" he asked. "All of them," I said. "Front, back, windows, garage. I want nothing old left behind, not a single key." He nodded, setting his toolbox down. The metallic sound of drills and screws soon filled the night, echoing against the wet stone walls. I stood there, arms folded, watching him dismantle each lock. With every turn of his screwdriver, it felt as if he were stripping away layers of vulnerability I hadn't realized I still carried. When he handed me the new keys, their edges sharp and unmarked, I held them tightly in my palm. "Now they belong only to me," I whispered. He looked at me briefly, then looked away, sensing this was more than just a change of locks. By the time I returned home, exhaustion wrapped around me, yet I did not sleep. I laid the keys on my nightstand, gleaming under the lamp like a row of sentinels. My mind kept replaying Lydia's tone, the ease with which she claimed what was never hers. I knew locks alone would not be enough. She had already slipped inside once. She would try again, and when she did, I would be ready. The next morning, I arrived at the villa early. Contractors were in the kitchen, measuring countertops, their voices bouncing off the bare walls. I moved among them like a ghost, my thoughts already several steps ahead. I dialed a security company. "This is Mrs. Caldwell," I said. "I need cameras, every entrance, every hallway, and the main rooms inside. I want coverage from every angle." The technician, a young man with tired eyes and a clipboard, looked up at me. "We can install today, but it will take several hours." "Do it," I said. "I'll stay until it's done." He nodded, and soon the villa hummed with the sound of drills again, wires being fed through walls, cameras mounted like watchful eyes. I paced from room to room, the smell of dust and plaster mixing with fresh paint. My heart beat steady, almost in rhythm with the hammering. When the first camera came online, the screen flickered to life. I saw myself reflected in its lens. My face appeared smaller than I felt, lined with age, framed by silver hair. But my eyes stared back at me, unblinking, unwavering. The lens captured something no mirror had shown me in months: resolve. I stood still, letting the camera hold my image. If they think I am someone who can be led, someone to be tucked away in a corner room, they will soon see how wrong they are. By afternoon, the system was complete. The technician demonstrated the app on my phone, each camera feed appearing with the swipe of a finger. I thanked him, paid without hesitation, and walked him out. When his van drove away, I was alone in the villa for the first time since the night I had overheard them. Silence filled the rooms, but it was no longer hollow. It felt charged, purposeful. Every red light on the cameras blinked softly, like watchful hearts beating in unison. I carried my journal to the dining room table. The smell of sawdust lingered. The wood floors gleamed under the late afternoon light. I opened to a blank page, uncapped my pen, and wrote carefully, "Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the turn of a key. Sometimes it watches through an unblinking eye, waiting for the truth to reveal itself." The words steadied me. I closed the journal and laid my hand upon it, the ink still wet beneath the cover. I rose and walked to the front door. The new lock gleamed, untouched by deceit. I slid the key in slowly, hearing the clean click of tumblers falling into place. That sound echoed louder than any applause I had ever known. It was the sound of control reclaimed. I lingered at the doorway, turning back to glance at the camera in the hallway. Its black lens caught the last of the daylight. For a fleeting second, I imagined Daniel beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder. He would have approved of this quiet act of defiance. "Good," I heard him say in my memory. "Protect what is yours." I stepped out, locking the door behind me with deliberate care. The metal click rang sharp in the air, final and absolute. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept my phone on the pillow beside me. Every time I unlocked the app and saw the villa's empty rooms on the screen, I felt a calm resolve settle deeper into my bones. I was no longer waiting to see what Lydia or Ethan might do. I was preparing, and as I drifted toward sleep, I whispered to the darkness, not in fear, but in certainty. The game has changed. They don't know it yet, but the house is no longer just mine. It is my witness, and it will not lie. The morning after the cameras were installed, I brewed tea as usual, the faint fragrance of chamomile curling into the air. My phone buzzed with a notification. I unlocked the screen, expecting nothing more than an empty view of polished wood and painted walls. Instead, the feed revealed Lydia standing on the porch of my villa. She looked around quickly, her hair pinned neatly, her coat drawn tight. She pulled a key from her pocket and slid it into the lock. My breath froze. The lock resisted, and she twisted harder, her lips pressed into a thin, frustrated line. She tried again, jiggling, leaning into the door as if persistence alone could bend steel. When the key refused to yield, she stepped back and pulled out her phone. I watched her speak rapidly, her hand slicing the air. A moment later, Ethan's face appeared in the frame. He walked up hurriedly, his shoulders hunched against the wind. Lydia thrust the key into his hand. "Try it!" she snapped, her voice muffled but sharp enough that even through the camera I could read the anger on her lips. Ethan inserted the key, gave it a twist, then shook his head. "It doesn't fit." Her face twisted. "It worked before." I leaned closer to the screen, my tea cooling untouched. The anger in her movements was not the disappointment of someone locked out of possibility. It was the outrage of someone who believed she had already been inside. They argued in low voices, Lydia gesturing fiercely toward the door, Ethan glancing nervously at the street as though afraid of being seen. Then she grabbed the key back, tried once more with trembling hands, and finally let out a soundless scream of frustration. She turned, stalking away, her heels striking the steps like gunshots. Ethan followed, silent, his head low. I placed the phone gently on the table, my pulse racing, but my hands steady. They had believed they owned a way in. That key had not fallen from heaven. It had been given, or taken. The question gnawed at me. How? I drove to the property management office that afternoon. The receptionist, a young woman barely out of college, greeted me with a polite smile. Behind her, the manager, Mr. Callahan, emerged from his glass-walled office, adjusting his tie as he recognized me. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said warmly, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What a surprise! How can I help you today?" I held his gaze, calm but unwavering. "I need to know if anyone besides myself has been given access to the villa." His smile faltered. "Of course not. Your contract is very clear. Only you—" "Then explain to me," I interrupted, my voice low but sharp, "why my cameras recorded my daughter-in-law trying a key at my front door this morning." The color drained from his face. He motioned toward his office quickly. "Let's discuss this privately." Inside, the blinds drawn, his hands fidgeted with a pen as he spoke. "There must be some misunderstanding." "No," I said, my voice cutting through his excuses. "There is no misunderstanding. Either someone in your office gave her that key, or she obtained it by deception. Which is it?" He sighed, shoulders sagging, and finally admitted, "One of our junior staff. She said a woman came in claiming to be your daughter-in-law. She told the girl that you were devastated, too fragile to manage details, and that she had been asked to check on the property for you. She was polite, convincing. The staff member believed her." I let the silence stretch. The sound of the clock on his wall ticked steadily, filling the space. My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with confirmation. Lydia's sweetness was not for comfort. It was a mask, a blade wrapped in silk. Mr. Callahan stammered, "Mrs. Caldwell, I assure you, the employee has been reprimanded. It was an error in judgment, nothing more." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes fixed on his. "An error in judgment could have cost me everything. Do you understand? Everything." He swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "It will not happen again." I rose slowly, gathering my purse. "See that it doesn't, and remove that employee from any account that bears my name." As I stepped back into the cool air outside, I drew in a deep breath. Anger simmered beneath my ribs, but it was no longer the anger of shock. It was tempered steel. On the drive home, I replayed the morning's footage in my mind. The way Lydia's face tightened when the key failed her, the way Ethan stood behind her, silent, complicit. They had already imagined themselves inside those walls, already chosen rooms, already assigned me to a corner like baggage stored away. And they had done so with the help of lies. When I reached home, I placed my journal on the desk and opened it to a fresh page. My pen hovered before I wrote, "Her tenderness is not for comfort. It is a distraction, a way to dull suspicion while she sharpens her knife." I stared at the words until they blurred. Outside, the evening light dimmed, shadows stretching long. Somewhere deep in me, I felt a shift. What had begun as a gift, a dream to bring us together, was now a battleground. I closed the journal gently, then turned to my phone. I scrolled back to the still image from the morning. Lydia bent over my lock, key in hand, her eyes hard. I saved it, not as proof for others, but as a reminder for myself. Ethan's voice was rushed, eager, almost too bright. "Mom, listen, we just heard something from the realtor. There's another family interested in the villa. They're serious buyers. If you want to help us, we need to act quickly." I let the words hang in the air, my thumb resting lightly on the porcelain rim of my cup. I could almost see Lydia standing beside him, whispering lines into his ear. His tone carried the stiffness of rehearsal. I smiled, though he could not see it. "Is that so? Another family?" Yes, Ethan insisted. They've already toured the property. The agent says they're preparing an offer. If we don't move today, we'll lose it. My eyes flicked to the journal lying open on the counter, yesterday's entry still inked bold. Her tenderness is not comfort, it is distraction. I felt the truth of those words deepen. Let me think about it, I said softly, my voice measured. I'll need time. Mom, he pressed, urgency sharpening. Time is exactly what we don't have. If you're serious about helping, now's the moment. I closed my eyes, letting silence be my shield. He sighed into the phone, exasperated, before hanging up. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the listing they claimed another family had seen was one I had ordered, reposted myself. The property manager had agreed, quietly, to put it back on the market as if available. A test. I wanted to see just how far they would go when pressed against imaginary competition. By noon, my phone rang again. This time Lydia's number lit the screen. Margaret. She corrected herself quickly. Nora, we can't wait. The realtor said the other family's paperwork is almost ready. Please, if you're willing, we need to make an offer in full. Her voice was sugary, but cracks lined the sweetness. Full? I echoed, feigning surprise. Yes, she said quickly. Cash, no contingencies. It's the only way. Heh. I traced the wood grain of the table with my fingertip, listening as she spun her story, imagining how confident she must feel, how convinced she was of her own performance. Let me think, I replied again quietly. A pause. Her breath caught, then steadied. I know you don't want to lose this chance, Nora. It's perfect for all of us. Imagine the holidays, the children running down the hall. We could finally be together. Together. The word landed like ash on my tongue. Together had never sounded so lonely. That evening, I lit a lamp in the villa's dining room, the golden glow soft against freshly painted walls. My journal lay open before me. I dipped my pen slowly, the scratch of nib against paper echoing in the quiet. Each lie is a stitch, I wrote. One by one, they sew a fabric meant to cover greed. But the pattern shows itself in time, no matter how carefully woven. I set the pen down, staring at the sentence until it blurred. Outside the windows, the night pressed close. I listened to the silence, broken only by the faint hum of the cameras, each one recording faithfully, every blink a promise that truth would not stay hidden forever. The phone buzzed again. Ethan's name. I answered. Mom. His voice was tighter now, desperate. The other family raised their offer. We're going to lose the house unless we match it. Please, can you help? We'll pay you back, I swear. I let him speak, every word heavier than the last. When he finished, I said only, You sound anxious, Ethan. Because this matters, he shot back. Don't you want us to have a real home? Don't you want to be close to us, to the grandchildren? We're trying to build a life here. I thought of the roses still waiting in their pots, petals drooping, unplanted. I thought of Daniel's steady hand on my shoulder, the way he would remind me that love without respect is not love at all. You'll have to excuse me, I said gently, and ended the call. The silence that followed was deep, unbroken. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. They thought they were tightening the net around me, but all they had done was expose the threads of their own deception. That night, before extinguishing the lamp, I touched the page once more. The ink was dry now, but the truth in it felt alive. Each lie is a stitch, and sooner or later the fabric will unravel in their own hands. I closed the journal, locked the villa's door with my new key, and walked into the night air, the cold biting, but clean. My footsteps on the stone path were steady. ChatGPT said, the call came just after breakfast, when the steam from my teacup still curled into the morning light. Ethan's voice was rushed, eager, almost too bright. Mom, listen, we just heard something from the realtor. There's another family interested in the villa. They're serious buyers. If you want to help us, we need to act quickly. I let the words hang in the air, my thumb resting lightly on the porcelain rim of my cup. I could almost see Lydia standing beside him, whispering lines into his ear. His tone carried the stiffness of rehearsal. I smiled, though he could not see it. "Is that so? Another family?" "Yes," Ethan insisted. "They've already toured the property. The agent says they're preparing an offer. If we don't move today, we'll lose it." My eyes flicked to the journal lying open on the counter, yesterday's entry still inked bold. "Her tenderness is not comfort, it is distraction." I felt the truth of those words deepen. "Let me think about it," I said softly, my voice measured. "I'll need time." "Mom," he pressed, urgency sharpening. "Time is exactly what we don't have. If you're serious about helping, now's the moment." I closed my eyes, letting silence be my shield. He sighed into the phone, exasperated, before hanging up. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the listing they claimed another family had seen was one I had ordered reposted myself. The property manager had agreed quietly to put it back on the market as if available. A test. I wanted to see just how far they would go when pressed against imaginary competition. By noon, my phone rang again. This time, Lydia's number lit the screen. "Margaret," she corrected herself quickly. "Nora, we can't wait. The realtor said the other family's paperwork is almost ready. Please, if you're willing, we need to make an offer in full." Her voice was sugary, but cracks lined the sweetness. "Full?" I echoed, feigning surprise. "Yes," she said quickly. "Cash, no contingencies, it's the only way." I traced the wood grain of the table with my fingertip, listening as she spun her story, imagining how confident she must feel, how convinced she was of her own performance. "Let me think," I replied again, quietly. A pause. Her breath caught, then steadied. "I know you don't want to lose this chance, Nora. It's perfect for all of us. Imagine the holidays, the children running down the hall. We could finally be together." Together. The word landed like ash on my tongue. Together had never sounded so lonely. That evening, I lit a lamp in the villa's dining room, the golden glow soft against freshly painted walls. My journal lay open before me. I dipped my pen slowly, the scratch of nib against paper echoing in the quiet. "Each lie is a stitch," I wrote. "One by one they sew a fabric meant to cover greed, but the pattern shows itself in time no matter how carefully woven." I set the pen down, staring at the sentence until it blurred. Outside the windows, the night pressed close. I listened to the silence, broken only by the faint hum of the cameras, each one recording faithfully, every blink a promise that truth would not stay hidden forever. The phone buzzed again. Ethan's name. I answered. "Mom." His voice was tighter now, desperate. "The other family raised their offer. We're going to lose the house unless we match it. Please, can you help? We'll pay you back, I swear." I let him speak, every word heavier than the last. When he finished, I said only, "You sound anxious, Ethan." "Because this matters," he shot back. "Don't you want us to have a real home? Don't you want to be close to us? To the grandchildren? We're trying to build a life here." I thought of the roses still waiting in their pots, petals drooping, unplanted. I thought of Daniel's steady hand on my shoulder, the way he would remind me that love without respect is not love at all. "You'll have to excuse me," I said gently, and ended the call. The silence that followed was deep, unbroken. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. They thought they were tightening the net around me, but all they had done was expose the threads of their own deception. That night, before extinguishing the lamp, I touched the page once more. The ink was dry now, but the truth in it felt alive. Each lie is a stitch, and sooner or later, the fabric will unravel in their own hands. I closed the journal, locked the villa's door with my new key, and walked into the night air, the cold biting but clean. My footsteps on the stone path were steady. The game was no longer about a house. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to be sewn into their design of convenience. And as I walked away, I knew with a certainty that steadied me. They had underestimated the woman who wrote her own story. It was late when the knock came at my door. The sound was hesitant, uneven, as though the person on the other side debated turning back even as her knuckles struck wood. I set aside my pen, my journal half filled with the day's reflections, and opened it. There stood Lydia, her shoulders drawn in, her face pale beneath the porch light. Her eyes shimmered with the faint trace of tears, though I could not tell if they were born of exhaustion, calculation, or both. "Nora," she said softly, almost breaking on my name. I came to apologize." Her voice wavered, but her feet stepped inside the moment I held the door open. She perched on the edge of my sofa, as if ready to bolt, her hands clenched in her lap. "I panicked," she began, staring at the carpet. "My parents' health is failing. We're drowning in bills. Ethan's business hasn't been what we hoped. I just wanted a home, a fresh start for all of us." I settled into the chair across from her, folding my hands, letting silence stretch between us. The tick of the wall clock filled the space she could not control. Finally, I asked, my tone measured, "And impersonating me to obtain a key? That was panic, too?" Her head snapped up, her mouth parting, then closing again. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I thought if I could check on the house, keep track of progress, it would make things smoother when you decided to help us." The corners of my lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "You thought wrong." She shifted, her voice rising with forced conviction. "Nora, I didn't mean harm. I was desperate. When I saw that villa, I imagined life finally turning around. My parents safe, Ethan and I not buried under debt, you close to us. It was hope, not greed." Her words spilled fast, polished yet fragile. I remained silent, eyes steady on hers. My refusal to spar seemed to unravel her more than any accusation could. "You don't believe me," she said at last, her tone sharpening. "I believe," I answered calmly, "that this is less confession and more negotiation." Her breath caught. "No, that's not— Every word you've chosen tonight," I cut in, "has been about control, not repair, not remorse. Control. You want to steer the story so I see you as victim, not instigator." Her cheeks flushed. She wrung her hands until the knuckles whitened. "Do you think it's easy for me to admit all this? To come here at night, alone, asking for forgiveness?" I leaned forward, my voice low but unwavering. "Forgiveness is earned by truth, not by performance. And what you've given me tonight is theater." The air between us grew taut. Her breath quickened, her composure fraying. She rose suddenly, pacing. "You think I'm the villain? You always have. But you don't see? My parents can barely afford medication. Ethan's drowning in loans. I lie awake at night wondering if we'll even make rent. That house, it felt like salvation." I let her words echo, the desperation ringing hollow against the weight of all I had witnessed. "Salvation built on lies," I said softly. She stopped, back to me, shoulders rigid. "I did it for the family." I shook my head. "You did it for control. There's a difference." She turned then, tears clinging to her lashes, though her gaze was hard. "What would you have done, Nora? Watched your family fall apart? Watched everyone suffer when you had the power to stop it?" For a moment, the question hung heavy. I thought of Daniel, of years spent building brick by brick, never once by deception. I thought of Ethan as a boy, promising to protect me, not to trade me for comfort. "I would have asked," I said finally. "Not manipulated, not lied, not stolen." The words struck, and she flinched. Silence settled again, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. She lowered herself back onto the sofa, her face buried in her hands. For the first time that evening, her voice lost all polish. It came raw, cracked. "I was scared," she whispered. "I still am." Something inside me softened, not enough to forgive, but enough to see the frightened girl beneath the sharpened edges. Yet even that flicker of pity could not blind me to the truth. Her apology was not born of change, but of fear of losing her grip. I rose, walking to the window. Outside, the night pressed close, rain streaking the glass in thin lines. My reflection stared back at me, lined, tired, but unbroken. "Lydia," I said without turning, "I won't raise my voice. I won't argue. But understand this. Your words tonight don't absolve you. They expose you, and I will not be led into your script." Behind me, she inhaled sharply, then stood. "So that's it? You won't even try to see me as more than my mistakes?" I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "Your mistakes are choices, and choices carry weight. If you want me to see more, then show me more." Her eyes darted, searching for a foothold she could not find. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she grabbed her coat, her movements jerky, and headed for the door. At the threshold, she looked back, her face a mix of exhaustion and defiance. "One day, you'll realize I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to survive." I said nothing, only watched as she left, the door closing softly behind her. When silence reclaimed the house, I returned to my journal. The ink from earlier had dried, but the page waited for more. I wrote with steady hand. Her confession was not meant to heal. It was meant to control. And in her eyes, survival has always justified betrayal. I laid the pen down, feeling neither triumph nor despair, only clarity. The house was mine, the truth sharper than any key Lydia could forge. Harris slid a folder across his desk. His office smelled faintly of coffee and old leather, the blinds half closed against the gray Portland sky. He didn't look up right away. His eyes stayed on the papers, as though steadying himself before speaking. "Nora," he said, his voice even but heavy, "you asked me to dig into Lydia's background. What I found isn't just one mistake. It's a pattern." I opened the folder. Inside, photocopied deeds and notarized signatures stared back at me. One name repeated itself, Lydia's grandmother. Harris tapped the top sheet. 5 years ago, Lydia and her parents convinced her grandmother to sign over her home. They said it was to avoid taxes, to protect the property. Within months, it was sold. The money, gone. And the grandmother was placed in a nursing facility. She died there 2 years later. The words landed with the weight of a gavel. My chest tightened, as though the air had turned too thick. I traced the faded ink on the document with my fingertip, remembering Lydia's trembling voice in my living room days before. "I only wanted a home, a beginning for our family." That plea echoed now against Harris's revelation, hollow and cruel. "So," I said quietly, "what she tried with me was not new." "No," Harris replied. "It was practiced, refined." I closed the folder slowly, the edges pressed against my palms, sharp enough to sting. "What do you want me to do with this?" he asked. "There's ground here for legal action, fraud, undue influence, elder financial abuse. If you want to move forward, I can start the paperwork today." I shook my head, meeting his eyes. "Not yet. This isn't about a courtroom. Not now. This is about knowing the truth." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Just remember, Nora, truth cuts both ways. It gives you clarity, but it also shows them exactly how far they've already gone." I stood, thanked him, and carried the folder out into the damp afternoon. The rain had started by the time I reached the villa. Drops struck the windshield in steady rhythm, smearing the world outside into streaks of gray. By the time I parked in the driveway, the folder felt heavier in my arms than when Harris had handed it to me. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and the roses I had placed in the hallway vase. I set the folder on the dining table and stared at it for a long time. In my mind, Lydia's face flashed again, eyes glistening, lips trembling as she whispered, "I'm sorry." I panicked. Now those words rearranged themselves into what they truly were. Lines from a script she had performed before. The camera in the corner blinked red, watching me as faithfully as it had watched her trying to force her key into my door. I almost laughed. a bitter sound that never made it past my throat. I picked up the phone and called Ethan. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. "Mom?" "I met with Harris," I said evenly. "Do you want to know what he found?" A pause. "What do you mean?" 5 years ago, Lydia and her parents took her grandmother's house, promised it was for her good, sold it, put her in a nursing home. She died there. Does that sound familiar to you? The silence on the line stretched so long I thought he might hang up. Finally, his voice returned, strained. "That's not what Lydia told me." "Of course not," I replied. "She never tells the whole story, only enough to keep you looking at her with pity instead of clarity." He exhaled shakily. "Mom, she's been under so much pressure." "This is not pressure, Ethan. This is a pattern." I heard movement on his end, muffled voices. Lydia's, sharp and insistent. Then the line went dead. That night, I sat at the dining table, the folder still open, the lamp casting long shadows across the pages. I picked up my pen and wrote slowly in my journal. She said she wanted a home for her family, but history tells me she builds shelter only by tearing down the old walls of those who trusted her. This isn't panic, it's choreography, and I will not be her next stage. I closed the book, my hand firm on the cover. Outside, the rain battered the windows, louder now, like a warning I had already heeded. I rose, walked to the living room, and watched the footage from the cameras. Lydia at the door, shoving the key that never fit. Lydia circling the garden, pointing as if she owned it. Ethan by her side, his silence louder than any words. Harris was right. The truth cut both ways. It cut me with sorrow, because the people I had raised and welcomed into my life were willing to treat me as prey. But it also carved out the hesitation that had once held me back. Now I could see their moves before they made them. And unlike Lydia's grandmother, I was still standing in my home. The phone rang late in the evening. I had just poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, the porcelain warm in my hands, when Lydia's name lit up the screen. I hesitated only a moment before answering. Her voice came sharp, stripped of the honeyed tone she usually wrapped around her words. "You bought that villa just to mock us, didn't you?" she spat. "You've been dangling it in front of us like bait. You're cruel, Nora. Selfish." I kept the cup steady, though my fingers tightened around it. The faint crack along the rim spread with a quiet snap. "Lydia," I said evenly, "that villa is mine. I worked for decades, with Daniel by my side, to be able to buy something like it. It was not purchased to torment you." She scoffed, the sound harsh against my ear. "You don't even need all that space. You're old, you're alone. What will you do with 6 bedrooms? That house should be for us, for Ethan, for the children we're planning. We are the future. You only need a corner room. You should be grateful we'd even let you live there." The words sliced through me sharper than any blade. I closed my eyes, letting her voice hang, feeling the weight of it press into the quiet of my kitchen. In that moment, I understood something with perfect clarity. In her eyes, I was not a mother, not even a person with her own life and dignity. I was an obstacle, a relic taking up space she believed belonged to her. I drew a slow breath. "So that is how you see me," I murmured. "Don't twist this," she snapped. "We're offering you family, safety, but you'd rather sit alone in a big, empty house than help your son's family thrive. Do you know how heartless that sounds?" I set the cracked cup gently onto its saucer. "What sounds heartless, Lydia, is reducing me to a burden who deserves only a corner room. What sounds heartless is assuming my years of sacrifice should now be erased so you can play lady of the manor." There was silence on the line for a beat. Then her fury surged again. "You wouldn't even have that house without Daniel's insurance money. Ethan is his son. That money was meant for family. You've stolen his legacy." My chest tightened, not from her words, but from the audacity of them. Daniel had worked his whole life for us, for me, and now his name was being twisted to justify theft. I spoke slowly, each word chosen with care. Daniel left that money to me, his wife, the partner who stood by him for 40 years. He trusted me to use it wisely. And Lydia, I will not dishonor his memory by letting greed decide how it's spent." Her breath caught on the other end, and I could almost see the anger burning in her eyes. "So that's it? You'll just watch us struggle while you sit in luxury? You're punishing Ethan because of me." "You punish yourself," I answered softly. "Every time you lie, every time you put your wants above respect. Don't confuse my boundaries with cruelty." She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You'll regret this. One day when you're old and truly helpless, you'll wish you had us close. Don't come begging when no one else will care for you." I felt my hand steady on the table, though inside, something twisted painfully. Still, my voice stayed calm. If care comes at the cost of dignity, then it is not care at all, it is captivity. Her breathing grew ragged, then the line went dead. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the cracked teacup cooling beside me. Outside the night was still, broken only by the whisper of wind against the windows. For a moment, grief washed over me. Grief that my son's wife could speak to me with such venom, grief that Ethan allowed it. But grief turned quickly into steel. I wrote in my journal before bed, the words flowing without hesitation. In their eyes, I am not mother or guide. I am an obstacle, a wall they want to tear down. They speak of family, but what they mean is ownership. I will not surrender myself to become furniture in my own life. When I closed the book, I felt the echo of her words still circling in the air, but they no longer pierced me. They revealed her, naked and cruel, and in that revelation, I found my calm. I asked Ethan to meet me at the villa on a Sunday afternoon. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, and the clouds hung low as if the sky itself anticipated what was about to happen. When he stepped inside, his shoes left faint damp marks on the polished hardwood floors. He looked around nervously, as though the house itself might accuse him. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant. "Why here?" "Because truth belongs in the light," I replied. I motioned for him to sit, then picked up the small remote lying on the coffee table. The television screen flickered, and I pressed play. The footage filled the room with silence sharper than any shout. Lydia appeared on screen, standing at my front door, a key clutched in her hand. She tried it once, twice, again and again, her face twisted in frustration. Then she circled the house, pointing toward the windows, her gestures bold, almost proprietorial. I let the clip run longer. Ethan watched as she stepped into the garden, her voice faint but audible through the recording. "The master suite will be perfect for us. She can manage in the small room by the stairs." Ethan's face drained of color, his shoulders hunched forward as though the weight of those words had settled onto him. He whispered, "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she went this far." I turned to him, my gaze steady. "No, Ethan, you knew. Maybe not every detail, maybe not the stolen key, but you knew enough, and you chose silence." His hands trembled in his lap. He bowed his head, and the light from the window stretched his shadow long across the floor. It looked like a burden he could not put down. "Lydia said," his words broke. He cleared his throat. "She told me you were fragile, that you needed guidance, that you didn't know how to handle things after Dad died. She said she was protecting you." I leaned closer, my voice quiet but unflinching. "Protecting me by locking me out of my own home? By planning where to tuck me away like an unwanted guest? Ethan, that is not protection. That is erasure." His eyes darted up to mine, filled with shame. "I wanted to believe she meant well. I wanted to believe she loved you." I shook my head slowly. Love does not disguise itself as ownership. Love does not shrink your mother into a corner while taking her roof. He buried his face in his hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint tick of the clock on the mantel, each second stretching like a judgment neither of us could escape. Finally he spoke, his voice muffled. "What do I do now?" I took a breath, steadying the storm inside me. "You stand where you should have stood from the beginning, between right and wrong, not between your wife and your mother. You tell her the truth, you draw your line, and you live with the consequences." He lifted his head, eyes red. "And if she leaves me?" I touched the table between us, my fingers pressing against the wood as if grounding myself. Then she leaves. Better to lose someone who feeds on deceit than to lose yourself. He swallowed hard. The boy I remembered, the boy who once promised to always take care of me, flickered in his face for just a heartbeat. But that boy was buried under years of excuses, under the pull of a woman whose hunger knew no end. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "Sorry is a beginning," I said softly. "But it is not an end. What you do next will decide if those words mean anything." We sat in silence again. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the glass like insistent fingers. The footage on the screen froze. Lydia mid-gesture, her arm raised as if she were already declaring ownership of what was never hers. I picked up the remote and turned it off. The room plunged into stillness. "Ethan," I said finally, "I cannot fight for both of us. I can only fight for myself. But you—" I let the words hang, heavy with choice. "You must decide where you stand, not tomorrow, not when it's easier, now." He rose slowly, his shadow shrinking as he straightened. "I need time." I nodded, though inside I knew time had already run thin. As he left, I stayed seated at the table, the faint crack in my teacup catching the lamplight. My hand brushed the journal at my side, but I did not write. Some truths did not need ink. They carved themselves directly into the soul. That night, as the rain turned into a storm, I lay awake listening to the thunder roll across the sky. Ethan's bowed head, his shadow stretched long on the floor, replayed in my mind. It was not only his burden, it was mine too, for I had raised him. But now, the choice to carry it or lay it down belonged only to him. The call came just after dawn, when the mist still clung to the garden and my roses bent under the weight of dew. Ethan's name lit up my phone. His voice trembled, carrying both excitement and desperation. "Mom," he said, "Lydia's pregnant. We just found out. It's early, but we wanted you to know. And Mom, with the baby coming, we need that villa. The child deserves a proper start, a real home." I pressed my hand against the window pane, the glass cold under my palm. My heart ached at the thought of new life, my grandchild, but his words carried chains, not joy. "Congratulations, Ethan," I said softly. "A child is always a blessing, but don't confuse a blessing with entitlement. A baby needs love, not a house taken by deceit." There was silence on the line, broken only by his breathing. "You don't understand," he insisted. "Lydia's been sick already. She worries every night. We can't raise a child in our cramped apartment. Please, Mom, think about what this means for our family." I closed my eyes. His plea wasn't new. It was the same melody, played now with a softer instrument. The child was not the true note. Manipulation was. "Ethan," I said, steady and clear, "I have thought, and the more I think, the more I realize this house is not your foundation. Your marriage, your choices, your honesty, that is what a child needs. Not stolen walls and borrowed keys." His voice cracked. "So you'd rather see your grandchild suffer?" The words pierced me, but I would not let them lodge in my heart. Don't place your failures on the shoulders of a child who hasn't even taken its first breath. My grandchild deserves parents who stand on truth, not schemes. The call ended with his sigh, heavy and defeated. That evening, Lydia called. Her tone was thin, a mixture of weariness and venom. "Nora, I'm carrying your grandchild. Don't you want to give it the best chance at life?" I let her words hang before answering. "What I want is for my grandchild to be raised in a home where integrity is not for sale. A villa cannot replace honesty. Don't mistake walls for love." Her voice sharpened. "You're cold. You'd use a child as an excuse to punish us." I sat at my desk, journal open, pen poised. "No, Lydia, you're the one using a child as a bargaining chip. Life is sacred. Manipulation is not." She slammed the line shut. I lowered my gaze to the paper and wrote slowly, the ink dark and unyielding. New life cannot justify betrayal. To twist innocence into leverage is its own cruelty. The letters shook slightly under my hand, but their weight was undeniable. Later, I placed the journal aside and touched the cracked teacup I had refused to throw away. It reminded me daily of the truth. Once broken, trust does not return whole. The villa stood firm, locked and guarded, while storms gathered within my family. Yet inside me, there was a quiet resolve. I would welcome my grandchild with open arms, but not at the price of surrendering my dignity. The battle lines had been drawn, and now even innocence had been drafted into their war. It was not to bow to threats, no matter how tenderly wrapped. It was to ensure that this new life entered a world where justice still meant something. The rain had just begun when I stepped into Harris's office, the air filled with the faint smell of polished oak and old paper. My lawyer, Mr. Harris, looked up from a stack of documents with eyes that had seen too many families fracture over greed. He gestured for me to sit. "Nora," he began, adjusting his glasses, "we have grounds for criminal charges: fraud, impersonation, financial abuse of the elderly. If you wish, we can move immediately. The evidence is solid. The security footage alone speaks volumes." I lowered myself into the chair, my fingers resting on the worn leather armrests. For a long moment, I did not answer. Outside the window, roses climbed along the fence, drenched by the rain, their petals heavy but unbroken. "No," I said finally, my voice steady. "I don't want to press charges yet." Harris frowned. "You're choosing restraint? With what they've done?" I met his gaze. Restraint is not weakness. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one left hanging above their heads, not the one swung immediately. He leaned back, studying me. "Then what do you propose?" "I want every legal safeguard in place," I said. "Iron walls of paper, contracts, declarations, quiet, binding truths they cannot twist. If they step even 1 inch further, the law will cut clean." Harris nodded slowly. "A sword of Damocles." "Exactly," I murmured. "Let them live knowing it hangs there, ready to fall." He slid a set of documents across the desk. "These will secure your property under the trust irrevocably. No transfer, no signatures, no early inheritance schemes without your full written consent, notarized and witnessed. Anyone attempting otherwise will face immediate legal action." I read each page carefully. My hands did not tremble. With each signature, I felt less like a victim and more like the keeper of my own fortress. Harris spoke again. "If Lydia or Ethan attempt to pressure you, you only need to call me. Everything is documented now. And Nora, you have been more merciful than most. Many in your position would demand prison." I let out a breath, almost a laugh. Prison would be too easy. Living under the shadow of their own lies, that is punishment enough. And my grandchild deserves parents who learn, not parents in shackles. For a moment, silence filled the office, broken only by the scratching of my pen as I signed the final page. The sound was crisp, final, like the closing of a lock. When I looked up, Harris studied me with something like respect. "You remind me of clients who survived wars. They too understood that survival is not about shouting the loudest, but about waiting with clarity until the moment is right." I smiled faintly. "Life teaches us patience, Harris, but it also teaches us to recognize when patience ends." We shook hands firmly, his grip warm, mine unyielding. As I left the office, the rain had stopped, and the sun slipped through the clouds. I paused on the steps, lifting my face to the light. In my bag, the papers rested, heavy yet liberating. That night, at home, I brewed chamomile tea, the familiar scent wrapping around me like a shield. I sat at my desk, journal open, pen poised. The words came easily this time. Power is not always in the strike. Sometimes it is in the quiet knowledge that justice waits, patient and prepared. Let them test it if they dare. I closed the book gently. For the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams of betrayal. The villa stood safe, its locks secure, its cameras unblinking. My dignity was no longer a fragile thing they could bargain away. It was inked into law, guarded by both stone walls and the silent threat of justice. When Ethan and Lydia finally moved out of the house they once claimed would be theirs, they ended up in a cramped apartment on the edge of town. Word reached me quietly, through the cracks in conversation, rent overdue, bills piling up, arguments muffled behind thin walls. They had chosen their path, and it was steep. I did not gloat, but neither did I intervene. Some lessons cannot be handed down. They must be lived. I kept my distance, though not entirely. A few weeks later, Ethan brought the baby to visit, a girl with wide, curious eyes. I held her in my arms, her small fingers curling instinctively around mine, and I felt a tenderness that no betrayal could erase. I kissed her forehead gently, whispering words too soft for Ethan to hear. When Lydia came with him, her smile was thin, her eyes darting around the villa like she still measured it for her possession. I kept my own smile polite, but the visit was brief. My granddaughter deserved my warmth, but my boundaries had to remain firm. Life at the villa settled into a rhythm, one far gentler than I had known in years. Mason, the retired schoolteacher from down the street, invited me to join his book club. At first I hesitated. I had grown used to my solitude, but curiosity drew me in. The club met in a sunlit library above the community center, the scent of old paper and brewed coffee filling the room. Mason pressed a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird into my hands and said with a smile, "We could use your perspective, Nora." As I sat among strangers, their voices animated with discussion, I realized how refreshing it was to be seen for my thoughts rather than my assets. I spoke once, cautiously, and the room listened, not out of obligation, but out of respect. That night, walking home under a sky painted with stars, I felt lighter. My neighbors, too, folded me into their circle without demand. Mrs. Callahan, the widow who lived across the street, appeared at my door one Saturday morning with a warm loaf of banana bread. "Too much for me alone," she said, pressing it into my hands. The sweetness lingered long after the loaf was gone. The children from the family at the corner house ran up the drive whenever they saw me carrying groceries. "Let us help, Miss Nora," they chirped, their small arms straining with bags too big for them. I rewarded their effort with cookies, their laughter filling the air like wind chimes. These small gestures wove a net around me, one of genuine kindness. They asked for nothing in return. They did not calculate or measure what I owed. They simply offered what family should have offered all along. One evening, sitting on the porch with Mason, the scent of roses heavy in the air, he turned to me. "You seem more at peace these days," he observed. I sipped my tea, the steam curling into the night. "Peace," I said softly, "comes when you stop waiting for those who wound you to heal you. Sometimes strangers carry the gentleness your own blood forgets." He nodded, understanding without pressing. The quiet between us was companionable, not empty. In my journal, I captured the shift. Strangers have shown me what my kin could not: kindness without agenda, respect without ownership. Perhaps blood ties us, but it is choice that keeps us, and choices can be remade. On Sundays, I still walked through my garden, pruning roses and inhaling their fragrance. But now, instead of the hollow silence that once echoed in my chest, I heard voices, neighbors waving from the sidewalk, the book club reminding me of the next meeting, Mrs. Callahan asking if I wanted to share supper. One afternoon, as the baby girl lay asleep in a crib beside me during a short visit, I brushed a strand of hair from her tiny forehead and whispered, "May you learn love without manipulation. May you grow in truth, not in shadows." That was the gift I could give her. Not a villa, not material inheritance, but the example of strength paired with tenderness. She would see it in time if she looked for it. As twilight fell that evening, the house glowed warm around me. I realized then that the truest family is not always the one you are born into, but the one you cultivate with kindness, respect, and resilience. The morning light poured gently over my garden, turning every rose into a jewel glistening with dew. I sat at the stone table, steam curling from a cup of chamomile tea, its familiar fragrance grounding me in peace. For once, the silence was not heavy. It was soft, welcoming, almost like an old friend returning. In front of me lay my journal, its worn leather cover now filled with months of entries. Sorrow, anger, revelations, resolve. I opened it to a blank page, pen steady in my hand. Words flowed without hesitation. There are losses that cannot be undone. Yet there are also beginnings, born not of surrender, but of dignity and courage. No one can force us to become the foundation of their greed unless we allow it. I underlined the last sentence, pressing the pen until the ink bled dark, deep into the page. Then I closed the journal with care, as if sealing not just words, but an entire chapter of my life. The villa gleamed in the sunlight beyond the garden, its windows catching the morning rays, walls standing strong. I looked at it and felt no guilt, no fear, only certainty. This house was not just stone and timber. It was the embodiment of survival. Mine, Daniel's memory, the life we built, and the resilience I carried forward. The phone rang inside. I let it ring twice before rising to answer. It was Ethan. His voice was subdued, almost boyish. "Mom," he said, "the baby's growing fast. She smiles now. Lydia, she's calmer these days. I think she's realizing we can't keep living on illusions." I listened, silent. He hesitated before adding, "I'm sorry for what I let happen. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I want you in my daughter's life. She should know you." I breathed in deeply, letting the words settle. "Ethan," I replied, "your daughter will know me. I will never turn from her. But forgiveness isn't a gift wrapped and handed over. It's a bridge. And you must build it, stone by stone, through your choices." There was a pause, then a quiet, "I understand." I ended the call gently, not with anger but with the weight of truth. It was not my job to repair what he had allowed to break. It was his. Later, Mason stopped by with a stack of books from the club. "We missed your voice at the last meeting," he said with a grin. "Next week, you're not allowed to hide behind those roses." I laughed softly, surprising myself with how natural it sounded. "All right, Mason, I'll come." As he left, Mrs. Callahan waved from across the street, a basket of fresh rolls balanced on her arm. The children raced past, their shouts of play filling the neighborhood with a kind of joy that could not be bought, only shared. I sat again in my garden, the sun warm on my face. The cracked teacup rested beside me, a reminder of how easily things can break, and how deliberately they must be mended or preserved. Some cracks I chose to keep to remember. Others I refused to carry any longer. Looking at the roses, their petals opening bravely to the sun, I smiled. Not the smile of someone who had won a battle, but the smile of someone who had walked through fire and stepped out whole. And I knew anyone watching, anyone listening, would carry this truth with them. That dignity, once defended, shines brighter than any stolen treasure. That greed can be resisted, even by one woman standing alone. As I lifted my cup once more, I whispered into the morning air, "Daniel, I kept us safe." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of roses, wrapping me in its quiet affirmation. The ending was not triumphant in thunder, but in stillness, a stillness that carried weight, meaning, and the undeniable promise that I would never again be made small.